Hello, UE peeps. My name's Emma Gregory, and I'm a local artist living in Bristol. I've been asked to talk to you today about the experience of being an artist in relation to well-being. I'm trained mostly as a printmaker, but I use a lot of drawing and ceramics in my work. I write sometimes. I do a lot of collaborative work. Sometimes with people who work in different disciplines, so dancers or musicians. And the work I make is mostly about people, relationships, feelings, instincts, connections. So I might make a series of things about myself as a mother and how I perceive my performance, or I might make a series of things about adolescence. That would be the kind of thing. I'm freelance, as are 77% of artists in the UK at the moment. That figure has come from Artists Newsletter's website. And I earn my money through portfolio working, which is to say that some of it comes from teaching. Sometimes I'm a technician. Sometimes I make theatre sets. I've also written for a living. And what else have I done? Loads of things, made stuff. Another thing that I do is that I teach, and I tend to work with adults, and they tend to be at about MA level. And the things that we work on, usually in small groups, are things like how you might talk about yourself as an artist, or what your research practice really could look like, how to make it more robust, how to plan towards your goals, what your work's really about, looking at themes, motifs, subject, that kind of thing. And I guess I would say that I am genuinely interested in how people develop and the idea of lifelong learning, more interested in that than anything else. Certainly more interested in individuals than in an art scene. I like to build small communities that work together over a period of time. So, for example, last year I put together a bunch of 8 artists from across the southwest to do 5 days work on drawing as a tool for continuing professional development, CPD. And we took it in turns to come up with the questions, and then we answered the questions we were going to address using drawing. I think I've been asked to do this talk partly because of that work, and partly because I'm not someone who is robust in terms of well-being. I've been mentally ill a number of times with depression, psychosis, and severe head injury, and this has left me very empathetic. I would say that is a key feature of my personality currently. I'm going to start by looking at what it might have looked like to be an artist living in Bristol pre-COVID, and then I'm going to look at what it's like now. We're in the midst of it. It's July. And then I'm going to look at how one might address the difficult task of building resilience in this situation. And I'm going to bring in what other artists have done and a couple of useful tools that I thought might be of interest. Here goes. Back in February, pre-COVID, the average artist in the UK was earning around £6,000 a year. An established artist, self-declared established, was earning around £13,000 a year. In my case, I was earning most of that, around 80%, through earned income, and around 20% through grants. Typically, I was getting grants from people like the Artist Newsletter and Arts Council of England, although the Arts Council of England success rate for an individual had fallen. I'll give you some figures. 17 years ago, in 2003, Grants for Arts, the success rate was 52%, so roughly half of the people who applied got a grant. In 2019, the equivalent fund developing a practice the success rate had fallen to just under 13%, so that's just over 1 in 10. It was getting harder to fund the grant end of things. It was also getting harder to find the work, mostly, I think, because of the lack of money in the sector. On the flip side, Art News reported on a study that Yale University had done looking at artists and resilience, which threw up some interesting observations. Let me just read you a bit. In 1963, the pioneering creativity scholar Frank Barron wrote that the creative genius is both more primitive and more cultured, more destructive and more constructive, occasionally crazier and yet adamantly saner than the average person. Researchers at the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence recently took Barron's ideas and tested them using 309 artists on faculty at top US art schools and a similarly sized sample of workers who had no training in the arts. Both groups were asked about their crazy sides, which we would call their psychological vulnerabilities, and also their saner sides, so their psychological resources, if you like. So under vulnerability, I would put things like vulnerability to stress, vulnerability to anxiety, vulnerability to depression. And under resources, I'd put ability to grow personally, ability to make positive relationships, ability to take control or autonomy, hope, and the resilience of one's ego. Now, what was interesting is that most of the time, individuals who have more vulnerability also have fewer resources. And it makes sense that if people experience more symptoms of stress, anxiety, or depression, they're less likely to have hope or to be psychologically well. Only about 10% of the people that they looked at had a higher degree in both areas. And that interaction on a moderate level tended to predict creativity or creative achievement. So artists are, in fact, as Frank Barron wrote, both crazier and saner than the average person. I identify with that. I find that really interesting, of course, because it infers that although the artists are dealing with higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, they also have the tools within themselves to deal with it, as long as they've got faith. And I don't mean religious faith, I mean faith in what they're doing. And that's what the article went on to say. I'll put that reference at the end of this little bit of film. Let's get back to March and think about what happened next. We went into lockdown and there was a huge shift in the change of my role as a freelance teacher and maker of stuff. And that, for me, I experienced that as a loss of identity, which it's not the first time in my life that's happened because of the head injury, principally. And also my experience of giving birth was pretty much like that. However, I also lost my income. And I'm sure a lot of you have lost out financially in the past few months and will continue to do so well into the future. I lost an exhibition opportunity, and I'm sure that most of you will have lost an exhibition opportunity or two. Projects started falling through. Basically, very, very slippery slope down which we have all fallen. And as a result, we're all probably feeling fearful, perhaps grieving, perhaps we're feeling a lack of control. And on top of that, some of us have lost actual people to this virus, which is terribly sad. Many of us feel isolated, having been in isolation. And the strange thing is that although we are physically isolated, we've all been through very similar sets of experiences, one way or another, I think, and we are more connected than we believe. So let's look at resilience and the question of well-being in relation to where we are now, where we find ourselves currently. For some artists, the turnaround was absolutely instant. For example, with Matt Burrows and his creation of the Artist Support Pledge, which is extraordinary achievement, and Keith Tyson, who launched the Isolation Art School in collaboration with Matt, and individuals who went online immediately, creating toolkits for artists such as Alex Finley, and teachers who were immediately sharing their resources, such as your own Sarah Bodman. Frankly, I'm much in awe of these individuals who seem to know immediately what their purpose is in a given situation, regardless of what they're feeling and their personal circumstances. For me, it just wasn't like that. And I've kind of fallen through the past 12 weeks. But here, for what it's worth, is how I've approached looking after or caretaking my own well-being. I asked my husband, who's a psychologist and works with the staff up at Bristol Royal Infirmary, Johnny, what can I do about my resilience during this period? And he directed me to two websites. One was Mind, and the other one was the American Psychological Association. Both of them have a list of 5 points which you should look at in order to build resilience. And the 5 points are your connections, your connectivity, your relationships. That's number 1. Number 2 is fostering your own wellness, body and mind. Number 3, finding purpose and learning and reaching out for new things. 4, embracing healthy thoughts. And 5, seeking professional help. Let's start with an inventory then of the connections that have kept me going through this period. Obviously, there was the obligatory family weekly quiz, which I'm sure lots of you have been trying to get your heads around. Ours is a very good family for. It's good at Christmas time and playing games. So that quiz has been a really fantastic, valuable thing to be part of every Saturday night. And then there were 2 groups really that came to the fore for me, and I wasn't expecting either of them to become as important as they have become. But the first one was the participants of the Press Play course that I've been running since, I've been running it for 4 years, but this group has been together weekly since last September 2019. So they knew each other very well at the point at which we went into lockdown. However, it could have gone either way because everybody was facing something different in terms of the challenge of going into lockdown, and some people completely freaked out. There were 10 of us initially, which quickly boiled down to 9. So we did lose a person in that first week. However, we carried on meeting in what would have been our session time slot on Zoom, and we are still meeting in that time slot Tuesday morning. we started off by looking at our value systems really, really in depth, and built from that into writing documents about belief that we shared. You have to remember that these people really trusted each other at that stage and had nothing to lose by sharing. Then we we did some training on what crits might be, how to make a crit a really positive experience, and developed a system for critiquing one another's work online, which has really worked. We've been through the whole of that process twice with 2 different sets of work, and it's been really fabulous both times. And now we're working with Tash McVoy, who's an artist based in Dursley, and she's leading sessions on writing applications for funding bodies and also for commissioning agencies and curators, which brings me to Tash. The second group Tash is a part of, so that Tash and Helen Acklam, who runs the garage in Clifton. You can look it up online, and it's on Instagram as well. I think she calls it at the garage. I think that's it on Instagram. Now these 2 I started working with through an initiative that Tash created. She's another person who creates groups when she feels a specific need. So she creates them around a theme or a question. And she put together a group of people, 8 of us there are, to examine death in order to live life more fully or with more positivity. And Helen and I were in that club with Tash, and we met once a month. Helen and I both live in Bristol. Everybody else in the club lives in Dursley. However, Tash, Helen and myself have been meeting once a week on Zoom to discuss what's come up in our own work, because we have all managed to keep working throughout, keep making things for ourselves. Only very recently have I stopped, which we'll go into in a minute, and that in itself is going to be challenging. So Helen, Tash and myself have grown very close through this period of extremes, and we've been very, very frank with each other about the challenges that we're each of us facing. And we've drawn a lot of support from each other, and I'm terribly, terribly lucky to have them. And just in time, because I moved to Bristol 7 years ago, and I have found it very, very hard to find good friends, to make new good friends, coming down from Liverpool, which is where I was before. So those are the 3 groups that I've been connected to, and now I'm building a connection with the online seminar group that happens every Thursday. It's open to absolutely any artist who wants to get involved through TAPS, which is also known as the Artist Project Space. So that's giving me access to a whole other peer group of artists about my age, I reckon. Next on this list is number 2, that is fostering wellness, which could be divided, if you like, into looking after your body and looking after your mind. In terms of looking after my body, my mum, bless her, 78, stepped straight into the fray, and she offered to run Pilates online every other morning for 20 minutes. So myself and my daughter Rachel, whom I'm in isolation with, or have been in isolation with, have been doing that throughout. And on the day in between, we've been doing the 0 to 5k challenge, Couch to 5k, I think it's called, which is a National Health Service app that you can download. We are only on week 5, although it is, of course, week 13. We keep repeating weeks. We don't push ourselves. We just do it. And the reason that these 2 things have been so good is that they create a sense of purpose. They create a sense of pride. And they've also
contributed to our endorphin levels, so positive chemicals all the way through. Which reminds me to talk about negative chemicals. I've been really trying to stay reasonable in terms of consumption of white wine. I'm still on 1 bottle a week, which I'm quite proud of, although it has been going up. In terms of looking after one's mind, everybody says be mindful. And I didn't really understand what that meant until lockdown, but now I can see that it means being in the present and also having the ability to refocus on the positive. So what I've been doing to do that is connecting with our tiny little garden, and it's not beautiful and it's not clever in any way, our garden, but it has given me enormous joy and real proper solace during this period of time, because I totally zone out when I'm in it. So let's move on now to finding a purpose, which for me is learning. I thought I was going to learn Spanish in lockdown, and also how to use social media with more effectiveness. Hell, I haven't done those things, of course. Instead, I've learnt enough to keep that Press Play course going, and I've learnt a lot about what it takes to operate online, on Zoom particularly. And more recently, I've volunteered to be on the steering committee of the garage, so I'm learning about the people on that committee, and I'm learning about that project. And I've applied to be part of the Bricks Building Resilience in Bristol project, although I haven't heard back yet, so perhaps that's something that I'm going to have to be resilient about in dealing with, i.e. a rejection. I feel okay about that currently. Tash said, vis-a-vis looking for opportunities for self-discovery, which very much comes under this learning and finding purpose thing. Tash said, even if you don't find time to work, why don't you start recording how you feel about the situation you're in? So I've started doing that. I've started doing free writing at the beginning of every day just to keep in contact with myself, I guess, because while I've managed to remain on an even keel throughout these 12 or 13 weeks, other people around me have not, and which brings me on to another area of learning, which is that I've learned a lot about anxiety and stress and emetophobia and early onset OCD. So that's a lot of learning crammed into a small space, I can tell you. Which brings us straight on to number 4, embracing healthy thoughts. I've tried very, very hard to keep things in perspective. I've tried very, very hard to accept change, even though it's been kind of thrust upon me and I resent it like hell. I've tried very hard to maintain a hopeful outlook, and I'm only managing that because I'm taking every half hour as it comes. I mean that. I don't mean every day or every week. I'm literally in the half hour. And I'm looking back at my own past and all the shit that I've ridden, and I'm thinking, you've got this, Emma. You can do this. Which brings us rather neatly, I think, on to point number 5, which is seeking professional help. What if I haven't got it? And what if I can't do it? Or what if the people around me haven't got it or they can't do it? Well, then I will seek professional help. If I'm honest, I wasn't surprised by the findings of that Yale study. It seems an obvious thing to say, but artists are in the business of self-expression, as are composers and choreographers and directors, and self-expression in itself is exposing. It has the potential to make you vulnerable. It leaves you vulnerable. You are out there. Sadly, I've had to stop making the big clay platters that I was making, for the time being at least, because their subject matter is too close for comfort.
It's as though they were predicting what was going to happen next in my small family, and now it's not the time. So, but I'm not worried because I'm imaginative, so I can come up with multiple ways forward and be flexible about how I go forward. And I'm not panicking about my practice and the relationship with that either, because the umbilical cord between myself and it is very, very strong. I've been working on it for years. Something will come up. I will probably go back to making something very process-led and see where that takes me, and hope that it doesn't just bring me back into a circle and dump me where I am now. If you're interested in any of the resources that I've mentioned during this We Talk, I'm going to publish a list of links for you, and I'll somehow link it to this film. Also, if you think that you might be someone that I could collaborate with, or you'd like to collaborate with me in any way or work with me in any way, please get in touch. You can do that through the Emma Gregory website or Instagram, Emma Gregory Makes. Good luck to all of you, and have a good summer, what remains of it, and in whatever way you can. If you're listening to this, you have self-selected as a creative, and it is your creativity that's going to get you through. I believe in that. Bye.